Hello and welcome to the international edition. These are the headlines. Former French President Jacques Chirac, whose years were dodged by allegations of corruption, has died at the age of 86. Meanwhile, UK legislators returned to Parliament after its now declared unlawful suspension, with the opposition ready to challenge the Prime Minister over his defeat. Also, while leaders gather in New York City for the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Stay tuned as we'll have reports on this and other stories as we retrace a major current events covered by the Euronews editorial team. Welcome. To our first story, former French President Jacques Chirac, who had one of the longest political careers in Europe, has died aged 86, following news of his death on Thursday morning, while leaders have been paying tribute to the veteran politician. The following story was done after the announcement of his death. Take a look.
The former French leader served 2 terms as president, 1 as prime minister, and took France into the single European currency. He served as head of state from 1995 to 2007, making him France's second longest-serving post-war president. Jacques Chirac is remembered internationally for his strong opposition against the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. He is also remembered as the first president to be convicted of corruption after embezzlement charges in a party funding scandal while he was mayor of Paris. Following the announcement of his death, the French National Assembly observed a minute of silence in his memory.
Frustrations over Brexit continues to blow up in the UK Parliament. On Wednesday, the House of Commons resumed activities after the UK Supreme Court ruled that the Conservative government had acted unlawfully to suspend its sitting. There were fears that the Prime Minister had sent lawmakers home to make it more difficult for MPs to discuss the terms of the UK's exit from the European Union. Take a look.
Mr. Barry Sherman.
Unbridled anger and explosive scenes as the House of Commons erupts over Brexit.
Morals and morality is a disgrace!
In stark contrast, diplomacy in Brussels as the European Parliament's Brexit steering group met.
We got up very early this morning to see.
You have to understand that I will not and I don't want to comment what happens in Westminster. And our side always been respectful of the situation in British politics, so I don't want to change my line.
But the talks continue, and Michel Barnier says he's still waiting for credible proposals from the UK on how to break the Brexit impasse.
We are still ready to work on any new legal and operational proposal of the UK.
Others in Brussels have doubts that Boris Johnson really wants to find an agreement with the EU.
Too nice.
Morning.
Morning.
Did you watch the comments yesterday?
Now, the only rational conclusion that I can draw is that he's not seeking a solution, because a solution would mean first finding compromise with the European Union, then building compromise in Westminster to pass an agreement. So if you really want to achieve that, maybe you do not start by confronting people the way he does.
Is this why? Thank you.
Perhaps the biggest problem for EU negotiators is that even if they do reach a deal with their British counterparts, they can't be sure it will be accepted by a British Parliament at war with itself. Neil O'Reilly, Euronews.
This week, while leaders have been gathering in New York City for the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly, better known as UNGA, leaders have been using the platform to raise major concerns from climate change, illegal sanctions, migrations, just to mention but a few. This story has the details.
The United Nations has put on its annual formal face that is the General Assembly. It's where the world's leaders can raise issues important to them. This year, the 74th session comes amid simmering tensions in the Middle East and concerns over climactic issues. The day began with Brazil's far-right president delivering a combative speech in defence of his environmental record, blaming the deceitful media for hyping this year's fires in the Amazon.
É uma falácia dizer que a Amazônia é patrimônio da humanidade e equívoco, como atestam os cientistas, afirmar que a Amazônia, a nossa floresta, é o pulmão do mundo. Ou outro país, em vez de ajudar, embarcou nas mentiras da mídia e se portou de forma desrespeitosa com espírito colonialista.
Donald Trump used his address to denounce globalism, illegal immigration, and to promote patriotism as a cure for the world's ills.
If you want freedom, take pride in your country. If you want democracy, hold on to your sovereignty. And if you want peace, love your nation. The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots.
Not everyone was gripped. US Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross appeared to get some shut-eye during his boss's speech. To stop tensions between Washington and Tehran becoming a wider conflict, French President Emmanuel Macron urged them to resume nuclear talks.
Je n'ai aucune naïveté. Et je ne crois pas non plus au miracle. Je crois au courage de bâtir la paix. Et je sais que les États-Unis d'Amérique, que l'Iran, que tous les signataires de cet accord ont ce courage.
And Turkey's president said the inequality between nuclear states and non-nuclear states is alone enough to undermine global balances.
Nükleer güce dayalı kitle imha silahlarının tümden yok edilmek yerine her krizde bir koz olarak ortaya konması herkes gibi bizi de rahatsız ediyor.
The session continues for several days with dozens of world leaders scheduled to address the General Assembly. Evelyn Laverick, Euronews.
The European Union has been accused of complicity in the defense of human rights. The accusation was made by Amnesty International, which published a report on Wednesday. The NGO accused the EU of double standards and falling short on its commitments to protect and support human rights defenders.
While world leaders gather at the UN General Assembly in New York, human rights charities want to heap pressure on Europe to be more coherent in supporting victims. An Amnesty International report accuses the EU of double standards. The human rights organisation says Europe stays silent on Saudi Arabia's crackdowns, for instance, compared to their louder criticism of China or Russia, say.
We found many innovative approaches where EU delegations have supported defenders. They've named them, they've attended their trials, and they have called for release of defenders in prison. We want to see more of this, and particularly looking at the EU guidelines for human rights defenders, these to be fully implemented for a much bolder approach.
In addition to China, Russia and Saudi Arabia, the report also analysed the situation in Burundi and Honduras over the past 5 years. Amnesty International says activists defending the rights of women, LGBTI people, indigenous people, land and the environment are all at risk. And some lawmakers want human rights promises to be a condition for the EU's trade deals.
We are at the moment negotiating the Mercosur trade deal with Brazil, and I have no understanding if we do not put human rights and environmental safeguards in this trade deal. What we see is that it's specific national, I would say egoistic interests of some member states in specific states that inhibit the EU from taking a common standpoint.
Several Brazilian human rights defenders are nominated by the European Parliament's political groups for the 2019 Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought. The prize will be awarded in December.
We now move to an issue which will not go away anytime soon. Climate change is devastating our seas and frozen regions as never before. A major United Nations report warns. According to a UN panel of scientists, waters are rising, the ice is melting, and species are moving habitat due to human activities.
Living by the beach might seem like a dream. But experts now warn against buying coastal properties. No part of the world will be spared from the impacts of climate change. Coastal regions are home to 214 million people and generate 43% of EU GDP. The latest EU report on the blue economy, or activity associated with the oceans, released in May of this year, shows the economic potential of sustainable business in this area is growing. Activity related to oceans, seas and coastal areas employs 4 million people with a total turnover of over 650 billion euros. The latest IPCC report on the impact of warming oceans shows the entire industry is now at risk. Healthy oceans can provide some of the solutions to climate change, but they can only remain healthy if global warming is limited. Sasha Vakulina, Euronews.
Before I bid goodbye, here's a recap of other stories making headlines around the globe. Is this a hoax or a witch hunt? U.S. President Donald Trump says the latest calls for his impeachment are both and slammed the motion. Democrats opened an impeachment inquiry against the Republican president on Tuesday, accusing Trump of seeking foreign help in the hope of smearing Joe Biden and of using military aid to Ukraine as a potential bargaining tool. One of the world's oldest tour operators, the British Thomas Cook, has declared bankruptcy. Thomas Cook declared bankruptcy on Monday, disrupting flights and services for millions of tourists. The firm failed to reach a last-ditch rescue deal, triggering the UK's biggest repatriation since World War II to bring back stranded passengers. The collapse sent shockwaves across the industry. Well, we've come to an end of the show. It has been a great pleasure presenting to you this issue of the International Edition. Stay tuned to other programs available on our website, africanews.com, or on our application, Africanews. You can also find us on our Twitter or Facebook pages, respectively, at Africanews and at Africanews FR for French. I've been your host, Elaine Wangalwa. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing. Goodbye.